Good morning, PE activity students. This is Mr. Fogel again with IVCC for our summer session online. I had a little homework assignment for you last week. You all did very good so far as I've looked. And just to show you the math one more time, here we go. All right. We took my weight, 188 pounds. We divided that by 2.2 to give us kilograms. We took my height, which was 72 inches. We multiplied it by 2.54 and then divided that all by 100 to get my height in meters, which was 1.8288. From there, we had to meters squared, so we simply just took 1.8288, multiplied it by itself to give us that number there, 3.345. And then we simply just took the kilograms divided by the meters squared, and by plugging that into the calculation, we go ahead and get 25.5, and I am considered overweight. So we can kind of see how this is not necessarily the best predictor for everybody. It's a great predictor for the average person, average American, to tell us what our about height to weight ratio is, but it still doesn't take into certain things like muscle mass, right? Bone density. That's why certain other types of methods are going to be more beneficial, like doing a skin fold test, using something like a BIA, which is a bioelectrical impedance analysis, a very relatively cheap piece of equipment that can be used to calculate somebody's body fat very quickly with little error. A couple other things I want to touch on though before we get started into the rest of the material for precautions, for physiology. What we're going to cover is the general guidelines for cardiovascular training. Now this is one of the most important things we can get from this summer session here. The American College of Sports Medicine recommends that everybody gets regular cardiovascular training. Okay, regular cardiovascular training. And what this entails is a combination of running, swimming, bicycling, jumping, etc. Exercising, hopefully in a cooler environment, to protect yourselves. But about 30 minutes of these activities at a moderate intensity. And if you want to go stronger, absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe a vigorous intensity. Now, the great thing about doing a more vigorous intensity is that less time is necessary, right? We increase intensity, we can cut back on our time. But still, let's go with the basis here. 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week of moderate training, cardiovascular activity. That meets exactly the guidelines laid out by the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Heart Association. So 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. We can switch that and say 75 minutes of intense activity. But again, with children, we need to have more precautions. We don't need them going intense the whole time. So if we go somewhere in that middle ground, that's going to be very, very beneficial. And what have we noticed? PE classes, about 30 minutes long. Perfect for moderate intensity activity. With resistance training. Resistance training is something that you must be very careful with. I had mentioned before that epiphyseal growth plates are growing in the long bones of kids, especially from the ages of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and of course into those pubescent years then too. So it's very important to supervise that very, very closely if it is offered. If you feel uncomfortable teaching it, don't do it, plain and simple. But they can be performed safely with resistance training, so like using dumbbells, resistance bands, different kinds of exercise equipment like that. If the repetitions are done in a higher amount, with the resistance being much lower overall. So if the kid's going to theoretically fail doing the exercise, right, give them something lighter weight first, see if they can do 20 repetitions with it. If they can do 20 with it, then we can bump the weight up a little bit more. But once we get to a region that is between 8 to 15, there is no need to push them any harder. Okay? Again, we're going to put too much undue stress on their bones, especially at their age. So moderate fatigue, 8 to 15 repetitions to failure is more than sufficient for a child. Example circuit. Okay, let's go ahead and bounce into that real quick just because we can, and I'm just going to talk about it, and I'm sure you can look these up if you need to know how they look like with these exercises. I'm not going to perform them right now, but number one, right, if we want to do like a circuit, let's say we make at the gym. We got 8 cones lined up around the whole circle, and there's a mat at some of them, so you can do some exercises. But you have some equipment. The first station, easily jumping jacks. You blow your whistle, all right, 30 seconds, everybody does jumping jacks. And then after you blow your whistle again, give them 15 seconds to move to the next station, and then so on and so forth. So it's like, you spread the kids around in a circle, 3 or 4 per station, get them working together, encouraging one another. Make it fun, I guess you could say. Play some music during it. Even make the sessions a little bit longer, 40 seconds each with 20 seconds rest. That's a little bit more high intensity for them, so you're able to get their exercise output increased. But again, station 1, example, star jumps or jumping jacks. I want you to do a little research on this, okay? Who is the jumping jack? I bet it's going to blow your mind away when you realize that this exercise is actually named after a real living person, or was once a living person. Number 2 would be a bicep curl. That could be done with dumbbells, but if your school doesn't have access to that, maybe they have exercise bands, or if you don't have access to that, you can take old milk jugs and fill them up with water. That's 8 pounds each. That is way more than sufficient enough for kids. Football feet, right? That's just running in place really fast as hard as you can. Shoulder presses, again, we could take those same jugs overhead for shoulder presses. Jump rope. I think most schools have jump ropes, so again, practice jumping rope. It helps with hand-eye coordination, muscle strength, and it's actually one of the best cardiovascular activities to do standing almost in place. After that, a push-up would be excellent to do to help with overall upper body strength, and no equipment is required. Of course, girls have them go from their knees. Boys, try to make them go from their toes. Make them work a little harder. Again, girls, you're going to be stronger on your lower half, especially at the younger years. Boys will be a little bit stronger on their upper half, and you'll see that over time. Boys, yes, upper half is stronger. Girls, lower half is even more stronger over time. 7th station will be a power squat. That's simply just squatting down as low as you can, bending the knees first, obviously, not trying to bend the back too much, but squatting and then jumping up into the air, squatting, jumping up into the air. That's plenty of weight-bearing activity for a child with that kind of resistance, just them jumping as high as they can and landing alone. There's no need to have a box and have them jump down from the box and then jump back onto another one at a young age. That's going to put way too much stress on their bones. And then lastly, they can lie on their back and do the bicycle exercise. That's a good core exercise, so it's going to help stimulate growth through the entire body. Some nutritional considerations to touch on for kids, okay? Now, I know, this isn't our job right now. Our job is not to make them eat, but you might be running a kids camp where you have them for 3-4 hours, and you're going to have a snack time. So you usually provide them with something like that, whether that's carrots and celery, peanut butter, depending on allergies, raisins. We're looking at things like making their own yogurt or little mini pizzas, whatever it is, whatever the plan is. But try to make sure it's more of a little healthy item and teach them about the food so they're understanding of what's good to put in their bodies versus not necessarily as good to put in their bodies. For toddlers, I know, they're the youngest ones. That's the group that are 3 years old, 2-3 years old. It's going to be hard to make them eat anything, and usually we aren't teaching them activities at that age so much. But toddlers, mainly things for them are foods based on their colors, textures, flavors. They seem to like things that are more colorful, things that are, looks like candy, I guess you could say. But encourage snacking for these kids if they are very active, right? Because they are burning off a lot of calories. They do need food. But what's even more important, being careful with liquids. Make sure you're making them drink, or not making them drink, but having them drink clear fluids overall. So water is the best by far. Things like Pedialyte or even a sports drink can be positive, but we don't want too much of those things. Other things that we can think about for guidelines for kids, as they get older, same thing goes into play. What do they like? Can we teach them the values of eating quality foods so that way they can put that into their lifestyle there on forth? As they age, they're going to need more energy, right? So a school-age kid, this is where we're at. School-age kids are going to need a lot more food overall than what a toddler would need. They're usually not quite, hopefully, as picky then, too. They're willing to stray and eat a little bit more of the different things. I don't know. I found out from all my kids' camps, Most of them love cheese. Most of them love some kind of granola bar, whether it's a chocolate one or a peanut butter one or a plain one. It's just finding the right flavors that mix for per kid. But then again, there's going to be things where they just don't want it at all. Plain and simple. You can't force feed anybody. Anyway, enough of that. Energy, right? Like I said, as their body increases in size, of course the energy requirements are going to increase. So if you want to write this down, you can. A recommended daily allowance of carbohydrates for a child is 130 grams a day. 130. That number is more than sufficient for even adults most of the time for carbohydrate intake. The human brain, a full-grown human, their brain alone burns 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrates a day, just doing its normal functions. So we can see why we need at least that minimum number. Okay. Anything extra is going to go into our glycogen reserves, which is the fuel within our musculature. The body will ingest the carbs. Once we ingest the carbs and digest them, any extra energy is stored as glycogen, as muscle energy. And if there's any extra carbohydrates put into the system beyond that, too bad. It's going to turn into fat, plain and simple. If you don't burn it off as you use it, it's going to turn into fat, plain and simple. Moving on to protein. Protein requirements, it's really hard to say an exact perfect amount of protein for anybody. It really depends on the person and how you feel comfortable eating that much. If you get any, sometimes some people can get some kidney pain if they take in too much protein, right? Because their body can't process that much. So it's better to start low and work your way up towards a little bit greater amount over time, especially if you have muscle soreness for instance, like you students. If you have soreness in the muscle, plain and simple, the muscle has been broken down. It needs time to recover. It needs fuel to recover. It needs carbohydrates to help the muscle regain its energy supply. And it needs protein to rebuild the tissue that's been destroyed so you come back stronger and better. So protein, what we're looking at is about 1.05 grams per kilogram of body weight for younger kids. That's like ages 1 to 3. So it's really not too hard. We're looking at 1 gram per kilogram. That's like, 15 at the most for kids that are 3. We move into kids that are ages 4 to 13, this is more prevalent for us. So we're looking at 0.95 grams per kilogram per day. And then as they get a little bit older, we're looking at 0.85 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That just makes this really simple, okay? Take your body weight, divide it by 2. That's how many grams of protein at the most is what you really need on a day-to-day basis. If you're doing more intense activity, then maybe you could take in like a protein shake or do some kind of protein fueled meal post-activity or throughout the day to help you get more protein in your diet overall. But again, 1 gram per pound of body weight, more than sufficient. School-age children, when it comes to fat intake, this is very important as well. Fat is one of the most important things that is actually for fuel. It is the most calorie dense, and it is also going to help satisfy the appetite the most, actually. So even though, like we hear about, low-fat diets are the way to go, well, maybe not. Maybe a higher fat diet is the way to go to encourage that we are giving our body a max amount of calories, cutting our appetite so that we don't overeat on those carbohydrates, which can cause insulin desensitivities, right, like diabetes over time, and obesity over time then too. The recommended daily fat intake for a child, we're just going to say ages 4 to 18 just to keep it simple, because this is who we would be working with. We're looking at 25 to 35% of your total calorie intake. So that's not too far-fetched. So let's say 33% of my calories come directly from fat. If you wanted to break that down, 33% of calories across the board would be more than sufficient for everybody or anybody trying to gain or lose weight. If we broke that down a little bit farther and said, okay, the person is on a 2,000 calorie diet, right? If we break that down, we want 33% of the calories going to each one of those macronutrients, which are proteins, fats, and carbs. So if we break that down, that's about 666, that's a weird number, but let's just go ahead and round it to 700 to keep it fun. So 2,100 calorie day diet, divide that by 3 to give us 33 split of calories across the board. That's 700 calories from each protein, carb, and fat. From there, we divide those numbers by their calories that each gram supplies. So a gram of protein and a gram of carbohydrate each are going to contain 4 calories. So we take that 700 number divided by 4 and we get, I can't even add today, 150, 175, you get the picture. We're looking at about that many grams of carbohydrates and that many grams of protein at the most per day per person. And then if we go down to the fats, 700 divided by 700 divided by 9 is the number. 9 is how many calories per gram with fat. Very energy dense. So again, take 700 divided by 9. That'll give you your number for grams of fat. 80s, I think that's what it would be in. Fat is going to be very important for nervous system development, for eye health, for joint function for kids as they're developing especially. So it is super important to get not just fat in the diet, but high quality sources of fat, like from nuts, from fish. I know, kids, right? Moving on a little bit farther, as they get into their adolescent years, it is super important that they've been consuming a lot of these foods that are going to help with bone density overall. And that's going to include foods that are going to contain calcium, vitamin D, and iron. So oftentimes we say the leafy greens, mushrooms, meat. These are foods that are going to supply adolescents with greater amounts of energy needs for their growth spurts, and higher or denser, you could say, amounts of vitamins and minerals that they need. Bone density is something that can only get so strong for the individual, and it is all based on how your diet was from the age of 5 and 6 all the way through age 18, and especially girls even more. You don't have this friendly hormone called testosterone in great abundance like us men do. So it is even more pivotal that you consume higher amounts of calcium and vitamin D in your diet than boys. You want to double or even triple us, because your bones are only going to get as strong as what you put in. So by taking in great amounts of calcium and vitamin D from ages 7 through 12, keeping that number consistent or maybe a little bit lower from 12 through 18, and then boom, that's as strong as your bones are ever going to get in your entire life. So girls, if you're watching this video right now and you are 18, 19 years old, try to take in more calcium and vitamin D right now as we speak, because you only got a couple years left of your bones getting as strong as they possibly will ever be, and they're only going to get weaker after that, unless you're doing a heavy weight-bearing activity. Eating disorders are something we have to think about then too, especially as we get into more of those adolescent years with kids. So we can see that, we can visualize, or not visualize, but we can see these things happening or changes happening very quickly when we're their teacher every single day. You can see weight loss happen, rapid weight loss happen. You can see sickness happening on the body. But these are the 4 things we're looking at. Okay, number 1, anorexia nervosa. Number 2, bulimia nervosa. Number 3 is binge eating disorders. And number 4 is muscle dysmorphia. Now with the first 2, anorexia nervosa and bulimia, these are going to be eating disorders where anorexia, somebody refuses to eat, or somebody overexercises where they just cannot take enough fuel to help sustain their current body weight, to where it comes, health concerns come on after that. Bulimia is a little bit different. Now somebody's actually purging. They're throwing up the food that they ingested, and you can see these signs even easier with staining to the fingers, to the teeth, sunken in eyes, weakening of body overall. And then over time, with a lot of these anorexia or bulimia disorders, especially with girls in their adolescence, they can have the female athlete triad come into play, where they have an eating disorder, or they're not taking enough calories, or over-exercising. Their bone density weakens because they don't get enough calories and they don't have enough minerals to support their bones. And then they have cessation of their menstrual cycle then too. So horrible things are associated with anorexia or bulimia, especially for females. Binge eating disorders are when somebody decides to overeat a ton at one time, right? It's always not good to do, right? You can feel upset in your stomach. You could be stuck in the bathroom for hours, who knows? And then lastly, muscle dysmorphia. Muscle dysmorphia is when somebody looks in the mirror and sees a scrawny person when in reality they have a great musculature already in hand. So it's kind of like the opposite, I guess you could say, of when, I don't, not really the opposite, but yeah, I guess you could say it is kind of like the opposite of anorexia. With muscle dysmorphia, they're trying to take in more energy, they're trying to work out more, they're trying to bulk up and get bigger. It can really screw up their personal life. Anorexia, bulimia, the opposite. They're purging, they're getting rid of food from their body instead, doing it the opposite way. So some of the characteristics, just to touch in real quick, our criteria for anorexia with the self-starvation is that body weight is lower than 85% of what is ideal. That's the big thing there. Bulimia, again, as I said, is characterized by purging or vomiting, we could say. They could also be misusing laxatives or diuretics. They could be fasting excessively long, or they could be doing excessive exercise. These are technically within the bulimia category. The binge eating category is characterized by eating tons of food and not purging. And it's usually overweight. Sufferers are usually overweight or obese. I can tell you that I was one of those people when I was an adolescent for a while. I would I would overeat all at one sitting. And I was very much overweight as a kid. In fact, my BMI, you probably wouldn't even be able to calculate it on a calculator. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Muscle dysmorphia. Okay, again, preoccupation with developing muscle. It's usually affecting men overall, but we see women now these days, especially if you watch any of the CrossFit and so on and so forth. We're seeing a lot of this muscle dysmorphia there. They feel compelled to constantly lift weights, like that's all they want to do almost, and it gets so absorbed into their life that they actually lose out on a lot of important things with family life and so on and so forth, or even getting to work, doing little things like that over time. Sufferers have a much higher risk of injuring their joints and also causing muscle injuries then too because of overexercising. Now I think that is a good place to stop this time for the video. I will be posting another video later on this week for you. There is no homework assignments for you, all right? Just go ahead and start thinking a little bit more about something that I want to put in your head. What is your experience with activity, exercise, games, and sports? Okay. Later on this semester, we're going to be doing something called a sportography paper. We're going to be writing about our experiences over our entire lifetime with activity, with exercise, whether it's positive or negative. I want to hear it all. Whether you continue or don't continue, I still want to hear it all. The next video, as I said, will actually cover the next portion of the information. So if you have the outline, which is in the, I think the syllabus page within Blackboard, sometimes it can be tricky to find, but look for it. I did post the syllabus. But what we'll be covering next time in class will be exercises a little bit more, as well as stretching a little bit, talking about some of these things. And then I'll also try to show you a video as well covering some information on CPR pretty soon, anatomy of the body, and then also the energy systems, which is going to be very much important when it comes to exercise and stretching, and what types of exercises or how long or how hard the exercise should be based off of different principles when it comes to exercise. So we'll be talking about the FIT principle, and we'll be talking about a couple other things with those 3 energy systems. Thank you so much. See you next time.